Almighty God, Lord, as some have entered their Sabbath, we've not quite yet where we're at. We just thank you for bringing us through the week, for leading and guiding and directing us in this movement and how we might better understand the depth of the patriarchal structure and sexism and how it is permeated through everything. And I pray, Lord, that each one of us would seek to be fully vaccinated against anything patriarchal. Lead us, Lord, that we would be the radical feminists that you have called us to be. And help us, Lord, as we prepare for the great work that is ahead of us. May you be with us tonight as we continue our review, that we would better understand how to sift material when we're reading. We thank you for all our blessings, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. This changing the spirit picks up where Christine left off. If I can find it, I know I have it open. Yeah, there we go.
The last one was the disciples slow to learn.
Yeah, and you started to touch on the media bias, a little bit on the media bias chart.
Yes.
So this one goes into it. She goes into it a little bit more detail. So it's really helpful to better understand how to sift things. And like I mentioned the other night, a lot of times when if I'm reading an article out of, if I'm in the New York Times or the Washington Post, I already know where they stand. Certain ones, we know where they stand. But if it's one that I'm not familiar with, I just usually put it into Google and the name of the website or the media, whatever it is, and then media bias chart. And you'll get a list of different ones to, links to go through. And then you can also kind of compare the different ones that are rating them. So I find it really helpful. Okay, so I don't think we'd be there. Okay, so this was from the, this is back when it was LGC, it's Eden camp meeting, the increase of knowledge in October 2020. And this just continues our studies from, or reviews from May 2020 to all the way up to August of 2021. So this was number 6 in the series, and it's called Changing the Spirit. So she says she keeps going back and repeating the same thoughts. She wants to get to the questions that she's been talking about. I think that Christine mentioned that too, that she had questions that she wanted to answer. I only have 2 presentations after this. We haven't even finished the first question, and we won't today. I do want to address the Sunday law, but the 2 questions, as I said, are woven together. I've heard thoughts being asked, repeated questions from multiple people, and some of these questions or thoughts are very important. So I want to spend the time to answer them. With a number of these questions, we're going to labor over it. So before we come back to our dispensation, a discussion of Concord, I want to review what we said about media literacy, how to identify a good source of information from a bad source of information. This is a problem across the world, and it's a question we receive from every country and every ministry. And I shared yesterday about, this was in the last presentation, about Crash Course YouTube series, and some people shared their testimonies in comments that it's helped them. For me, that series was encouraging because when it comes to studying the external events of the Midnight Cry, and as that message covered a wide range of external events, I have confidence that the tools shared in that series were used, and it gave me more confidence when we come to a correct understanding of external events. So I could only encourage that series. That's the Crash Course YouTube series, if anybody hasn't yet visited that. And then I want us to talk about the news organizations and look at the media bias chart. And they're placing these sources of news on this chart in a way that is designed to show us how trustworthy they are. And like I said, I think Christine showed the media bias chart. We're going to have it here quite a bit as well. So here's the first look at it. And I did going through, and I think Christine was saying that it changes and updates all the time. And that was probably why I struggled, because I had a different one than what she had, and I just wanted to get the one that she had, at least for this presentation. So the one that you'll see is the one that she had for this presentation. She talked about this horizontal line at the top, goes from the most extreme left to the most extreme right. So you got left over here, extreme left over here, you got center, and then the right. And so it's showing the political bias of these sources. And then the neutral, it runs down the middle, this center here. This is neutral. Everything to the left of that is leaning towards the left, and everything to the right is leaning socially conservative. So you've got the neutral here, the center, and you've got the far left coming on into the center, and then moving over to the right and the far right. So the horizontal axis is about their political spectrum. The horizontal is their political spectrum, and the vertical axis is how they access information. So this is the political, where they lean politically, and then this is their how they access information. So original facts reporting, and then it deteriorates as you go down. So beginning up at the top, it'll be original facts reporting, the most reliable. And then this is good. This is reporting of facts across here. This is more reliable, and it becomes less reliable as you go down. So it's more reliable up top. And if you look at, and she's going to talk about the different colored boxes, because we see this green box around here, and there's different boxes. The green one here is considered the most reliable. So keeping that in mind, that this would be most reliable, and you can see that there's really nothing on this side in the reliable, barely. Most of the reliable is over here on the left. So there's some boxes, like I just said, the green box is the most reliable. We see that in the top middle that we just covered. And then the very hard to see box that the color doesn't show real well, and it's somewhat reliable, are these extreme positions that you find on the far left and the far right, these boxes here. Somewhat reliable on the left, somewhat reliable on the right. But politically, they lean right, and politically, they lean left. So down here is completely unreliable. And it's interesting, the most reliable is called World Truth. Did I say that right? Yeah, the most, down here is completely unreliable. Most reliable, I might have said that wrong, but it's down here under World Truth. Most unreliable is called World Truth. So down here in the unreliable section, you have worldtruth.tv.
Which is less reliable than the Inquirer.
Yeah. So this is supposed to say unreliable here, but the most unreliable is a site called World Truth. Okay, I have a couple of concerns about this, but in general, it's probably doing a good job, the media bias chart. We should be aware of why these news organizations are in this position, and I'll give some examples. You can see why Trump attacks the media. If my arrow is neutral, going into the neutral side, it most would be judged to be skewing towards the left. Just an observation, as soon as a news organization skews right, their factual reporting drops off a lot faster than the left. So, so you don't have much in the reliable up here on the right. You have a lot on the left that is in the reliable, the most reliable. But when you start going to search your sources on the right, you find them out of this reliable box. They start dropping down real quick. So I think you can see that just from the chart. So the left is our more factual, trustworthy sources. And a couple of observations, you see CNN and MSNBC down here. These are internet video. You might be surprised to see them heading into unreliable territory. And why would that be the case? So why do you see MSNBC and CNN down here into the unreliable?
Well, it's not, is that the web, or, because there's another CNN up there in the web. This CNN is TV. So the TV is more unreliable than the web.
Correct. And these are TV. And these are articles to read.
I think it's because they try to be sensationalized. So they
Right.
use emotion.
Right. And to fill their time, they bring in all the experts and opinion people to give their opinions to fill time. And yes,
Yeah.
sensational, all of that. I mean, a long time ago, it got really hard for me to listen to the news because I just remember thinking, and this is many years ago, long before I lived out here, and that was 2015 when I moved out here. But noticing how nobody really seems to report the news. They give their opinion, you know what I mean? And even if they are reporting the news, they're reporting it with, I don't know if attitude is the right word, but they're reporting it with their attitude. And I thought media was supposed to be, the news was supposed to be like unbiased, just report it. So it was a long time ago when I noticed that. So the ones that are on TV, the 24-hour news channels, they're down here into the unreliable, but you do see CNN here where they're like reading articles, NBC as well, being up there. Okay, so I want us to see this little clarification. This is in this is what we just talked about, MSNBC and CNN TV down here. This is not the news you would look up online. So example, you have CNN television and CNN web news. The web news is reliable, most reliable portion up here in this box up here. And the most, so there is a difference between CNN here and CNN here, which we just went through.
So a comment from Susan, she says, occasionally I have seen a story in the New Yorker or Vanity Fair, and I don't think either is listed in this chart unless I'm blind, and that is a possibility, but it's not on that chart, just FYI, Susan. So when that happens, I will type in the name of the media source and its media bias, and when I do this, it will pull up the media bias and an explanation of its reliability or not. So, because they only have so much space on there. So they do have an interactive media bias chart that you can get from the front page where you can type in something that you're not seeing, and it'll show you where to find it on that thing. But they can't put all of them on that chart. They just put the most used, I guess, the most popular ones.
Yeah, and or it sounds like she does the same thing that I do. Just put it into Google and put the title into, because I've looked up the New Yorker before as well. And just type it up into Google and type in media bias chart next to it, and you'll come up with, because that's probably, it sounds like that's what she's talking about. That's what I do.
So good advice.
I found it helpful. Okay, so let's see. So I want us to consider why you would find MSNBC TV so low down here. If you go to their media bias fact check that we discussed yesterday, you could go to that web page. It'll discuss their history. It shows where they use strong emotional headlines, which can tend to risk being clickbait. They have filed a number of fact checks, but most of the reason they're filing these fact checks is because this being TV news organizations represented down here, these ones, they tend to have so-called experts come in, which I was just talking about, and speak, the political pundits. So looking at the definition of pundits, because they're not just political people. A pundit is an expert in a particular subject who is frequently called upon to give their opinions to the public. And you can see how opinions are formed even when we look at what we're unlearning and learning. We've had many opinions, many perspectives. Look at how we were in the conservative branch. You know, this movement was conservative, right? So our viewpoint was based on information over here. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that's right to say, but we were right leaning. And so our opinions were formed on all these things that and just, I'm trying to think of how to say this. As you become more connected, in tune with hearing factual information, your perspectives and your opinions change. So you might be watching CNN and listening to them have one of their experts or one of their pundits on there that's that does not have all the correct information, but their perspective and their opinions are based on the information that they have and where their mindset is. I hope I said that right. Everybody's following what I'm saying? So
It sounded correct.
okay, so when reading articles, especially opinion pieces, because there are articles that are opinions, obviously, it's learning to see as well, trying to read behind the scenes, trying to read and sift out the opinion that is incorrect. Also, when they do use emotionalism in there, which you talked about clickbait, but emotional, ism, and you will see that if you Google a source and put media bias chart next to it, it'll also tell you the reason that it's rated the way that it is, and it'll let you know whether or not they use strong emotional language. So facts entered into the mind are going to help with our perspectives on things, and emotions, they want to tug at your emotions. And so learning to be able to sift when they're trying to use emotional language. So these are 24-hour news source channels, and there isn't 24 hours worth of news. So they're going to ask these experts of different political views to come on and speak and give their perspective and opinion on what is happening. And their opinions and perspectives may not be factually correct. So that's kind of basically what I was saying. Then when you have their employees having to extend or stretch out the news, they can tend to be less careful about what they say, and they can make lazy mistakes. It's interesting, this comment, because I myself would say I only remember her recently talking about the left being lazy, and yet this was 2020 and she was already telling us this. And some people will probably pick up things, but I know I miss things, and the reviews are helpful because then I pick them up. But she was saying this in 2020. Okay, so and then this page gives an example of that, where they're reporting on political candidacy of Bloomberg. He spent $500 million on advertising. The US population is 327 million people. So the news anchor says he could have given every person in the United States, this is the link here for this article, the US population is 327 million people. So the news anchor says he could have given every person in the United States $1 million and still have money left. It was a lazy comment with bad math. If you divide 500 million by 327 million, every person gets about $1.20, not $1 million. So it's laziness and trying to stretch the news out that causes them to make silly mistakes. That's why you would find MSNBC so low on the trustworthy level. And that makes it difficult or challenging. I've always believed in being honest, and when we've come into studying this message, I'll be honest with what I understand, and I'll be honest with what I don't understand. But when you say something that's not factual, it ruins the reputation of, like, the news source. It ruins the reputation of the news source. So doing this and making lazy mistakes can ruin a news source that's trying to do a good job. Okay, so if you take the opinions of political pundits carefully and be careful of the lazy comments of some of their hosts, you can find the reporting actually quite reliable. You can see that easily here with CNN. Some of these sources are subscription. You have the New York Times up in here, the Washington Post. You see them shared frequently in the media broadcast because they are good sources. But there are others, ABC, Vox, The Guardian, non-subscription sources are highly reliable. Vox, I find a lot of good things on Vox as well. If anybody, I think Susan looks there, maybe we all do, but I'm pretty sure Susan does. But in The Guardian, we've all looked at a lot of articles in The Guardian. So they're up here in the very reliable. I want to make one other observation. The first was an explanation of why you might find something like CNN and MSNBC down here in the unreliable. Left-leaning people have criticized 24-hour news channels for a long time. I want to discuss Common Dreams. That's this one right here. You'll find it here on the left. It's quite out on its own here in the left and up, not quite reliable. It's just in the box of somewhat reliable. If you were to look up their fact check page, it's seeing that they lean strongly left, but a factual search showed that they hadn't filed a single fact check. They couldn't find a single article that had failed on its fact checking. So on this chart, they put it as somewhat reliable, but on the media bias page, they're rated higher for factual reporting due to proper sourcing and a clean record. So there are limits with the charts, kind of like probably what Christine was saying. There's only so much they can do with the chart, and maybe slight mistakes because it looks like it wouldn't be that hard to have this slid in here to put it on there. But that's what I do find rather than looking at the chart. When I Google it, it'll tell me why. And if it's somewhat reliable, it'll explain why. And it'll say that it failed a fact check, or it failed many fact checks, or it hasn't failed any fact checks, like in this case here, what she's talking about, this one. So I just want us to consider where we would stand if we were to take prophecy. Would we see prophecy as having a media bias where it immediately approaches Donald Trump as Hitler? I would suggest yes. That just immediately places us in a left position where we view Donald Trump through that lens. So if we say Donald Trump is Hitler, first of all, there's a danger that that sounds very emotional. And I think we would argue it's just a factual recording of prophecy. So using prophecy to say such a thing as well. So let's see. So if we were to take prophecy, would we see prophecy as having a media bias where it immediately approaches Donald Trump as Hitler? So is there bias in saying that? No, it's factual, though it sounds emotional. If you were to go back to prior Civil War times and you were to find a northern newspaper that posted an emotionally titled article about the evils of slavery, and then you were to see a southern newspaper that wrote an emotionally titled article about how escaping slaves were impacting the financial stability of white families, that's two media biases, two emotional headlines. Would you look at both of them the same? So one is talking about the evils of slavery, and the other one is about the financial impact because your slaves are escaping. You would definitely see it different. No, despite them both having a bias, one is reasonable, one is a reasonable one is reasonable, one is not. One you still may face confidence in, and one you will not. We have to be careful with emotionalism, but I do not have a problem if a news source has a left-leaning bias. Sometimes you see these organizations bring in right-leaning commentators, right-leaning opinion articles, so they can appear more balanced. So the Washington Post will have one particular writer who defends Trump on the pandemic. defends Trump on racism. So this news source seems to be more center and less left. I'm not so concerned about the media bias. There is a concern with the emotionalism where it can manipulate feeling. What we should be careful about is their fact-checking record if they're using information correctly. And again, you get that if you Google as well. A little more depth of it anyways, because you can get it off the media bias chart, but like she was showing with this Common Dreams, they have no fact check on strike on them. So so Googling it is also helpful to not just use the chart, but Google it as well. So you don't need a very large amount of news sources. There's a number in that box that I already mentioned. Sometimes when I see a news article, and you'll see this spoken of on the Crash Course series, once you have a number of sources that you trust, look for that story in all of them. Because if one has filed a fact check, it's unlikely that they've all made the same mistake to the same degree, and it'll start to show. So you can check a few different of the reliable sources for the same story. So with this chart, it's good to one degree, but I don't believe it's 100% accurate, which is a common problem with charts and graphs. I gave 2 reasons for that. It's going to place MSNBC TV on a similar fact level to One American Network. I don't believe that's a reasonable comparison. If you haven't heard about One American Network, they are not the safe source. It's conspiracy theories and propaganda. And that was, it would be over here. I don't see it on here. It might not be on this chart. So like any chart, it needs a careful analysis. Understand why MSNBC was failing. One American Network is deliberate propaganda. MSNBC TV can make lazy mistakes and call experts in to give opinions that we may not agree with, and MSNBC TV may not even agree with. So the chart would make them just about the same, and they are not. So you have MSNBC TV is not like One American News Network, One American Network, I think is what it's called. So someone asked about Voice of America. They have a good history recently. I'm not going back to the Cold War, but following the news, what Trump has recently done to this news source, it is struggling. A couple of thoughts, each have to check what is in their own country and in their own language. I would suggest you need to do a similar investigative process. Look for what they say about an issue that you are sure about. For example, if they start to say there were never any Russian troops in Ukraine, you know it's immediately failed to fact check. Look for motive language and where they stand on certain issues. At the moment, it's easy because you can just start to see what they say about the pandemic and about Donald Trump. Issues where facts are not hard to find. Pay attention to what country that news comes from. Sky News Australia is far-right propaganda. Sky News UK is actually probably in that reliable box that we saw on the media bias chart. You only know by either the UK or the AU. So when you're putting it up in your browser, whether it says .uk or .au. Yahoo News. Just my observation in Australia, they're more like tabloids. It's all about celebrities. So I don't use Yahoo News Australia. I deliberately put in the US, the .us, if I want their position, because I believe their reporting is more reliable. So Yahoo News in the US versus Yahoo News Australia. In the US, it's more reliable, and in Australia, it's more about tabloids and celebrities. So don't be afraid to look for news outside of your country. We are not nationalistic, so we shouldn't be with our news sources. Even if you're in a country like Australia or Britain that speaks the English language, you still need to double check the news sources coming from your own country and compare and contrast them with other countries. Obviously, if you don't speak English, that becomes more challenging and more important. Try and use the most reliable sources. And keep in mind the title of this. Does anybody remember the title of this presentation?
I forget.
Changing the Spirit. I don't think I really connected that when she first did it, but changing the spirit, because you've got the form and the spirit. So she's really focusing on, with the title of Changing the Spirit, the focus is on media bias and fact checking. Because it really, like that book, like the book that I told you that I talked about earlier that I'm reading, it's sort of acting like a vaccine in many areas of my life, which is good. I remember years ago, before I was in this movement, where I watched a lot of the videos on music. Some of you might be familiar with them. A lot of the different videos or pastors talking about music and the dangers of music. And I remember thinking, you know, relating that to like as if it was a vaccine. And back at the time, and this is a long time ago, I was the first one in line at Blockbuster every Tuesday to get the movies, to the latest movies coming out. And I remember thinking I really needed a vaccine for movies as well. And sure enough, somebody came out with stuff like that. So the material, so how we read affects us. And what, when you look at the study of the Apis bull, which this takes you back to May, which we've been focusing on throughout this time, you go back to the study of the Apis bull and how Israel got rid of the form, but not the spirit. And we have to get rid of that spirit of Apis bull. But the sources that we read from can be manipulative in our minds. And so thus the right sources, learning how to sift the sources is, to me, the best way I can relate it, like getting that vaccine we need. And getting rid of the spirit of Apis bull. And what is the spirit of Apis bull? Anybody?
Patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely needing to understand clearly every area that patriarchy resides in our lives, in our own personal lives, in the media, and the book called Backlash is really showing that how much they fight to keep women pressed down and imprisoned. So try and use the most reliable sources, but I gave an example with Common Dreams, why I don't find them unreliable. They've never failed a fact check, but they have a political perspective that in today's world becomes unavoidable. That said, I heard of them yesterday. There's enough in that box to keep with what is described as most reliable. So keeping with that reliable box and left-leaning. I'll give another example. I was searching for information on a particular subject. It related to Islam. In a Google search, I came across an article from this news organization, TRT World. The perspective of the article was what I wanted to hear. It read really well. It seemed to share the perspective I was developing. There's nothing in the name to indicate where it comes from, but I wasn't familiar with the source. So I researched the source. This news source is owned by Turkish Radio and Television Corporation, a news source owned by the corporation, which is owned by the Turkish government. In 2018, Reporters Without Borders ranked Turkey 157th in the world for press freedom from among 180 countries. Media Bias Fact Check describes this as a pro-government propaganda source. And because Turkey has a right-leaning government, the news organizations that the government directly controls are right-leaning. Even though what I read in the article sounded good to me, I discarded it. We have to know the sources of our news. If you can't identify a source, there's hundreds of these little videos being shared on that of some man. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be panning in a camera. Jacinda Ardern. I don't remember. I did look her up because I didn't know who it was, and she says we should know who she is. Jacinda Ardern is about to declare martial law. Those sources are just straight conspiracy theories, and I'm horrified when I see them shared and believed inside this movement. They'd be at the bottom of the chart with InfoWars. If it's happening in Oceania, then it's happening in other places too. I'm not sure, I don't think I have that right in here. So there's something wrong in that if anybody wants to go back to the video for it.
So everybody knows who Jacinda Ardern is, right?
She
Go ahead.
is the New Zealand's prime minister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And about, go ahead.
No, I just said good, good.
Yeah. Okay, so avoid opinion pieces. If you're unsure of the source, somewhat unsure of the writer, and they use extremely emotionally manipulative language, avoid opinion pieces. I hope this has helped someone. It's a fascinating subject to look into information in this information age. Not everyone wants to pay for subscriptions. That's one reason behind having the media broadcast in the WhatsApp group. But there are good sources that are not subscription. It's not completely necessary. We just need to have some tools in our kit of how to access that. One thought about what we're doing when it comes to information. The purpose of the media broadcast is not just to share with you current events. There's a greater purpose than keeping up with current events. If this is that chart, the media bias chart, many of us have grown up around this type of news source, bad on facts, on the far right leaning. There is a real danger that in just saying from now on, I'm going to follow current events. That's not where I want you to follow current events. The opposite side is correct. It may help you understand one current event correctly, but we are hardwired like a computer. Even if we start taking in the good information, our worldview, our perspectives, our very character is programmed from this wrong information source. So again, rewiring the brain and changing the spirit. And based on the title and what we're studying, she's connecting that to the sources that we read to be able to change our perspectives and change our worldview. But most of what we've been feeding off of was the incorrect source. So the main reason is not to follow current events. We need breaking and remolding outside of evangelical nationalistic worldviews. The way they manipulate history and sometimes subtly devalue certain groups of people. So there's not just looking at information on current events. We want to see information correctly as far back as we can go. Looking into what were the Vandals like, going back into the bringing down of pagan Rome. What's our perspective on the Crusades? Because even that can all be influenced by right-leaning Christian nationalism, especially coming from Adventism and some of those, what's been taught to us along the way. I'm returning again to the subject of the Apis bull. Just following current events from a good source is not enough. It will create the form, but not the character, not the spirit. So then this comes down to personal education. And this is a purpose also behind the media broadcast. This is where documentaries, particularly frontline documentaries, are very good. They can go back into past history and help re-educate us. And again, I asked earlier if anybody had watched, I don't know that everybody was here, but if you'd watched the abortion ones that I had posted in the WhatsApp thread on Wednesday, those were both frontline videos, but really breaking down what the pro-life movement did to and I was thinking about this during the week after we talked about it, how they used legislation, right? They used legislation in order to put restrictions on abortion clinics. And many of those restrictions, most of those restrictions had nothing to do with the safety of the procedure and of the patients, but for lack of a better word, downright stupid restrictions, petty, expensive, stupid restrictions to, and that's the work that has been going on by the pro-life movement. For myself, I've been totally oblivious to any of that going on, and had my kids in 91 and 93, not having any more, been out of touch with what all they've been doing. So to put all those restrictions to make it difficult for women to get an abortion in various states. So looking at the APIS bull here, so then this comes down to personal education, and this is the purpose behind the media broadcast. This is where documentaries, particularly frontline documentaries, are very good. They go back in history and help re-educate us. We won't have the right perspective of Black Lives Matters from just following current events from this source. If we've been at the bottom right corner down here, we won't have the right understanding from this source. We need to remake our thinking going back 400 years of history, and much of that becomes a personal work. But the failure to do that is one of the reasons we developed the form and not the spirit of equality. I want to repeat that because it's the point of my study. To not remake our worldview by appropriate education develops in us the form and not the spirit. So we can have the form of equality, but not the spirit of equality. The emphasis is on we need to remake our worldview by appropriate education. And good to note, I don't know who's on here with us, so this is just out to all of us. It's good to note that what she taught, I think it was in the second Vespers class that was recorded, where she started to talk about the many that are overthrown. Because I'm trying to think of to say it right, the Ellen White quote where she talks about the great test that the people of God must pass that determines their eternal destiny. And that test is at the Sunday law. And we know that the Sunday law is about equality. So if we have the form and not the spirit, we would wind up being among the many that are overthrown, unable to rightly identify and recognize and stand firmly against the subtleties of sexism and the patriarchal structure. An example, what I've heard over and over and over again in this movement is men suddenly or openly accusing us of the following. There's a board like IPR, that's the kind of board I'm talking about. Don't think of wood board, but a ministry board. There's a board, for an example, and on this board, we've remade it. So in the movement, the board has been remade, or someone has. And there's 7 women and 6 men. So now men are coming up and saying, you don't practice equality. What is the underlying deep set fear behind white nationalism?
Losing control.
Losing, who's in control? Is that what you said?
Well, losing control
Losing
of being
control?
in power.
Anybody else?
Replacement theory.
Anybody else? So this is the Proud Boys. This is all of them. What is the foundation of white supremacism? I'm not saying supremacist. Supremacism. Well, I can't say that word. Supremacism. What is the foundation of white supremacism? You can have your culture. You can do what you like. Be who you want, but don't replace us. Replacement theory. And losing control. To go extinct, it's known as the Great Replacement. Fear mobilizes people. It's that powerful emotion that undersets white supremacy. It underlied slavery. If you free Black people, and they have a lot of children, that they'll start replacing the white population in America. At one point, there was many Irish Catholic immigrants, so they're afraid of replacement by Irish Catholics, so they'll persecute them. It's kind of interesting because what was Pharaoh afraid of?
Being replaced.
Yeah, yeah. People from Muslim countries, they can tend to have a lot of children. Immigrants from some backgrounds can have a lot of children. Even particularly Vladimir Putin speaks about the Great Replacement in Europe, destroying what he describes as their white Christian identity and culture. So what they fear is replacement. It underlines white supremacy, and I wish I could show you how clearly it's demonstrated the way in this movement it underlines sexism, as men in this movement are afraid of being replaced in power structures by women. So this fear of being replaced by women. So while you have the replacement theory here when it comes to different nationalities in the white Christian race, you have men afraid of being replaced by women. Many men in the movement thought equality looks like this. I am a man. I'll move over a little and make room for a woman in teaching and leadership that I still expect to criticize and control. And then when you start saying that's not equality, this fear rises up and it demonstrates itself in these comments. So the man will let the woman have a little bit of space, which we're seeing, not just in this movement, but seeing from the different things that we're studying. And when it comes to the feminist movement, within the feminist movement, that okay, you can have higher paying jobs and you can be CEOs, you can be this, be that. Just remember your place as a woman, that you're still under the man. So they can still control and criticize. And then when you start saying that that's not equality, that, you know, what they're doing is not equality, there's a fear that rises up and it demonstrates itself in these comments. If you have a predominantly Black neighborhood in the United States with a predominantly Black school, you'll find it like this. This is a Black school and this predominantly white school, because segregation still exists. So you've got a Black school and a white school. Now, if you had $50,000 to give these schools at the moment, what could happen is they'll give $40,000 to the white school and $10,000 to the Black school. I'm using this as a parable. So now we have $50,000. How would you divide it? What these men would say, staunch equality. You need to give the white school 25,000. She's talking about what the men in the movement might say. Staunch equality. You need to give the white school 25,000 and the black school 25,000. This is built on the same fear of replacement. The only way to make sure that someone doesn't become over you is try to keep your foot on their neck. So the complaints we get in this movement is that we do not do that. We do not practice that. Using this as a parable, I would suggest we give 10 to the white and 40 to the black till we get equity. So we get to equality. Did that make sense? Everybody follow that? She's,
Yes.
okay,
Is it because
go ahead and
the-
repeat it back.
Well, the one who is oppressed has been oppressed for so long that it needs if you want equity, they need a lot more boosting up to even come to parity with the oppressors. So they need more money, more education, because the whites, they're going to get it anyways. But the blacks who have been oppressed for so long, they never had it. So they need all the advantage that they can receive, all the benefits they can receive, just to reach parity with the white people.
So what is she then saying about, because she's talking about the men in this movement and women in charge, what is she saying?
Well, the men are just seeing numbers. That's all they're seeing. You know, it should be equal numbers, 6-6 or 7-7 all the way across. But what men are not realizing is these women. There's one of the Vespers video that Josephine kept apologizing. I don't know if you saw that Vespers.
Yeah.
Josephine kept, and she says, "Don't say that in my class."
Yeah,
Because women, that's their position. That's what they've been learning from their culture, all their lives. So they need more education, more reinforcement, more positive reinforcement, more of everything that white male privilege has had for so long, for women just to reach, like I said, parity with the white men. And that's what, the men in our movement don't seem to understand. They need a lot more education, a lot more reinforcement, a lot more of everything just to bring them up. And the men don't want that.
because they still don't want to give up their power.
That's right.
And what they need to become almost, if I'm going to be right in saying this, correct me if I'm wrong, is the men need to be, I don't know if this is right to say, but take this submissive place to, I don't know if submissive is the right word, but to allow the women to rise up. They have to lower themselves for the women to rise and then work our way up to equality. I don't know if submissive is, go ahead.
I have some great pictures that show the difference between equality and equity, if you're interested.
Yeah, put them up. I've seen them before, I think, but put them up when I'm done if you want.
Okay.
So I don't mess up, and remind me, because I might forget.
Okay.
Just because I'm in that slideshow mode and I don't want to, I'll mess up. So remind me, if I stop sharing, I got to start back. I mean, I could do it, but we'll go back to it, okay?
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Okay. So the women have to be given more than the men for the women to build back up to where they need to be, and then we can work towards equality. Okay, so equity until you get to equality. And those are the pictures we'll show at the end. This is affirmative action. Equity until you get to equality. This is affirmative action. It's the only way to bring equality when you have 6,000 years of suppression. The failure to recognize this, we see it through sexism throughout the world, and this also comes down to education. They say they are in the correct source, Their worldview is in the incorrect source. It's the form and not the spirit, because even though the imbalance is so obvious, they have not educated themselves to see it and empathize with it. So when we're in Uganda and say there's 50 men and 10 women, and we say the front row is women only, and not everyone gets to speak in class, we're asking the questions directly to them. And if you're a man, don't raise your hand. A few individuals would say that's not equality. And our response is, we know, we're not trying to practice equality. The inequality and suppression has been so bad for so long. Not that long ago, you had almost entirely male schools. In some places, you had 100 men in the movement and 4 women. Those 4 women are not going to get an equal amount of attention to 4 men. We will practice affirmative action until that situation reaches equality. This is not an African problem. This is not a problem restricted to one part of the world. This is a European problem. You can see if Europe has a problem with nationalism and racism, and it severely does, the two issues are inseparable. There's a reason that the racist group Proud Boys are men only, because you cannot separate sexism and racism and nationalism. This is a European problem. It's a French world problem too. Tamina said Europe is heading into a bad place at high speed. We can see the United States in a bad place and going at high speed. I've been thinking about that iceberg quote. I went back and reread it, and it reads a little different than I remember it. But she had that dream about seeing the iceberg, and it had to do with the truth, and she had to go meet it and face the truth. I read it the other day. I don't know if anybody remembers what one I'm talking about, but I've been thinking about that iceberg passage when it comes to what she shared in that last Sabbath presentation that she did, in seeing laid out where you had Millerite history, the abolitionists succeeded. And what they succeeded in is in restraining the power of the South, of the bad side of the South, so that they couldn't enforce the Sunday laws. The Sunday law. They couldn't enforce it because they didn't have enough power, because the abolitionists did their job and succeeded. So you come to our history and you look at the work you look at the different waves of feminism, how second wave feminism became possible off of the work of first wave feminism, and then you come into the third wave and you see it start to fracture and split, and see how it eventually culminates into a different direction of feminism, of not this freedom and emancipation and equality, but settling for mainstream feminism. So the failure in the left and in feminism has given, how we watched trace over time, the work of Mitch McConnell and others in getting the court system structured the way that it is. So their failure has given the power and the strength to the right to enforce the Sunday law. So we've seen, and we know that there's no turning back. We saw that, I think she puts that at also 2016, but it might have that, I think it's 2016, but you can see from what we're understanding and what we're studying to date that there's no turning back. And that's how I kind of see that, as that iceberg. We're going to hit the iceberg regardless. It's a matter of hitting it straight on and taking that blow. but we're hitting that iceberg no matter what. Did that make sense?
It made sense to me.
Okay. Anybody have any other thoughts to,
Mary had a comment.
yeah,
More than just allowing room for equality or equity. Men in this movement who have these skills needed to teach women and help them come up to par.
yeah.
Good.
They can't be afraid to be, to allow a woman to have a place above them. There's more to it than that. But it's interesting because, like I said, the book that I'm reading or listening to, you can see it so clearly. You know, stuff that I was oblivious to, you can see it so clearly that they just will not, they'll let the woman have, you know, the certain jobs, or you can go out into the workforce. There's those that don't even want them in the workforce. And they have so steered society. And it's like you can see the failure of feminism when, as I'm listening to that book, you can see the failure. And radical feminism, I don't know what it will look like as we go forward, what the fight will look like. But I think a lot about where she mentioned second wave. Does anybody remember where she said second wave began? Not first wave, but second wave, and how it began? We talked about it, I think, the other day.
The 60s?
Yeah. I'm having a deja vu. Yeah, we did talk about this the other day. At the beauty pageant, remember?
Yes, the
Yeah,
women
Bob
were
Hope.
treated, yeah, they were treated like cattle.
And what was their what was the response isn't the right word. What did the radical feminists do?
They were angry.
They were angry.
Why
Got
not?
angry. Got angry.
A
So to me-
cattle parade, horrible.
yeah. So Tamina said that Europe is heading into a bad place at high speed. So are we. We need to not just follow current events, we need to educate. It runs deeper than many of us are willing to see in our own spheres of influence. And these comments demonstrate why we have the form and not the spirit. Women can do it to other women. When you see a couple divorce, the woman says, "You don't understand. She's really bad." When you see a couple divorce, the woman says, "You don't understand. She's really bad with money, so the fault is equal." What should the response be? First of all, there's no excuse for abuse. And second, why are some married women in this movement not understanding how to open up a bank account and budget correctly? You know, it comes back to the suppression. It's because a lifetime of sexism and suppression. When the thoughts are shared, she isn't good with money, therefore she carries fault for that. Women can do this to other women. It's a demonstration of the form and not the spirit. So these are women that are actually saying it about other women. Why can't she do it? But it's a lifetime of sexism and suppression. It's a lack of vaccinating ourselves. We were talking about that earlier, the vaccine. Educating ourselves. So this education that we're getting is as a vaccine, because the entire purpose of education is to develop empathy. And you won't just say she's just bad with money. You'll look at who was her father, who was her husband, what was her society, and you'll start to see why she's bad with money, and you'll recognize at whose door the fault lies, what failed her. These subtle perspectives that exist in Europe, as much as everywhere else, are demonstrations of how many of us have the form and not the spirit. And I'm not discounting prophecy and inspiration. Prophecy and inspiration are not going to tell you how to respond to the Romani people but they will tell you what you need to do about your perspectives. And prophecy is saying we need to re-educate, not by just reading recent news, but especially to go back and re-educate ourselves away from the wrong source to develop empathy. So in looking at, not that I'm going to talk about the Romani people in particular, but in what you're looking in current events, you may not have the real story of what happened, kind of like what she just talked about, the woman. Go back and look behind the scenes at why the woman doesn't know how to handle money. We're Romani people. There's prejudice against them. I learned that. I didn't even know of them, but I learned of that through Christina and Adriana. But going back behind the scenes to how they got to be the way that they are, instead of the prejudice against them, go back and understand who they are and what happened to them. So that could exist, that could take place with any group. You know, we look at it through, as well as looking at Black Lives Matters, go back 400 years and look and see what's happened. Okay, so we'll go through this and then we'll have Christine pull up the equity chart. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for our blessings. We see the heavy work we have ahead. So many of us have been set in a wrong mold for so long. It's taken you 31 years now to try and get a people out of it. And you've given us a deadline. I pray that you will help us. Remove us from apathy. May we make the effort required so we are fit for purpose, fit to represent you. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So if you want, Christine.
Okay. All right, so we'll start with this one. I have a couple. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you see the picture of the
Yeah.
equality and equity? So
Yeah.
I have a couple examples. They help. So in essence, in situation here, everyone has been given equal benches to the goal here is for the people to be able to see over the fence to watch the game. And they've each been given an equal size box. But you can see that in giving them something equal doesn't always reach the goal of being able to see over the fence to watch the game. Whereas in this situation, which is equity, people are given exactly what they need to reach the goal to look over the fence to watch the game. Whereas this person does not need anything extra because that person can already see over the fence. This person just needs one box, whereas this person needs two. And in the end, they can equally reach that goal of being able to see over the fence and watch the game. So the equity is in being given what a person needs to reach the equal goal.
Equity until you reach equality.
Yes, exactly. This one has the same premise, whereas in this one, everyone is given equally the same size bicycle. Okay, you can see that this person can't use it at all because they have a disability. This one is too tall. This one fits that person just perfect. And this one is too small for this bike, right? Whereas in this one, everyone is given exactly what they need to reach the same goal, which is to be successful and comfortably ride a bike on a road or the trail, right? So this person is given a smaller bike to fit their body. This person is given a taller bike to fit their body. And this one is a, can't remember the word for that type of bike, but it sits backwards so that person can sit on it. And so they've each been given equity to reach equality. So equally reach the same goal, but they each have different needs. And the needs are fulfilled based on what they need to reach an equal goal. And I have one more, which is similar. You can see they each have been in this picture been equally given the same box, which doesn't help this person at all, and this person doesn't need it. And in this case, they've reached, been given equity, different types and different amounts to reach the same equal goal. Okay, so those pictures helped me understand the difference, because I always thought, well, yeah, of course, equally, everybody should get something equally, but until you understand the goal, that different people need different things or different amounts to reach the same goal, then it's harder to understand. So anyway, I hope that helped.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of different things I've been hearing in this book that I'm listening to, but when it comes to like women at work, trying to think of in the study that we just did, she used a word for that. Equity until you reach equality, but what else did she use? Anybody remember?
I don't remember.
Affirmative action.
Okay.
So you're going to give more to the one that has been oppressed for them to be able to come up, what we're describing here, what we're talking about.
Right.
But I'm also thinking about, while they profess equality, they throw out hindrances all along the way. And using the abortion thing, for instance, it's like, okay, so abortion is a constitutional, no longer was a constitutional right, but we're going to throw out all these hindrances to make it difficult. So women at work, the same thing. They'll put all these hindrances out there. Women lose jobs because they got to go on maternity leave. They want to stay home and spend the first weeks with their baby, or they have to take off to take the baby to the doctor. And so women pay that price, but men don't. Women lose jobs over it, but men don't. So there's all these different places where they throw hindrances out purposefully. And then within the movement, we've actually had it here as well. Being said that we're not practicing equality. Kind of just leave it at that.
Because we need to practice equity to reach equality.
Right. Right. And why would that be? You know, we've been accused, the movement is accused of not being practicing equality.
Because we haven't let go of the spirit. I mean, we're not following the correct spirit.
Yeah, that's true too. I'm thinking about on an individual basis. She gave some examples on an individual basis because they don't have the spirit. They have the form and not the spirit, but because what's inside is they don't, it's kind of like the speaking, the actions, the speaking, professing versus the profession versus what you actually do speaks more highly, but because you're unwilling to submit, if that's the right word. I keep using submit and submission. I don't know if that's the right word to use. Maybe somebody has a better word to use.
Humility?
Surrender, humility, thank you. Unwilling to humble themselves and allow God to bring women up to where they need to be. So within the movement, you have this force of God is putting women in charge. God is putting women in charge, and men can have one of two reactions: to support and humble themselves and support and allow the process to do what it needs to do, or cry, you're not practicing equality. Right?
Become the victim.
You become the victim. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, well, that's all I have for tonight. I don't know if anybody else has anything. Thank you for sharing those images.
Yeah, they just helped me so much that I can only imagine, I needed a picture, a visual to understand the difference.
Yeah. So affirmative action, maybe that's something we can, let me just Google that real quick. I don't want to dig into another document. So we'll look up affirmative action and I'll pull it up on share screen and we'll kind of go through it. Just for additional stuff. Okay, so in the context of the allocation of resources or employment, the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to groups known to have been discriminated against previously. So when you take that in terms of what we are understanding with patriarchal structure and sexism, the ones that have been discriminated against, women, it's going to be favoring individuals, again, with what Christine showed, equity until you reach equality. So you're going to favor individuals that have, or groups that have been known to be discriminated against, and bring it up to equality. Restoring, I don't know if it's right to just say women, but restoring women to the place they were in Eden. But it's gender, restoring gender equality, but women and LGBTQ.
I have a story based on affirmative action.
Huh? Oh, go ahead.
I have okay, so I was hired by the Forest Service in 1990. And during that time, they, Region 5, which is all of California and Hawaii, had gotten trouble for not hiring enough women. And so they were under a consent decree where they had to hire more women. So there were, this summer, they had these interviews and there were 4 positions open. And everybody in our class interviewed for it, I think, or just a lot of people. Actually, maybe there was only like 7 people who interviewed for it. And there were 4 positions. And I didn't think I would get it. So I came in, just being myself. So I was really chipper, smiling, being really friendly. I didn't realize who was interviewing me. Come to find out it was the district ranger, which is the highest person that could have been interviewing me at the time, but I didn't know who he was. So I was just being myself. And I ended up getting the job. And afterwards, I had comments from other people saying that I only got the job because I was a woman. It had nothing to do with the fact that I was older than the rest of the people that interviewed, and that I had a lot more experience in leadership and being outdoors and working outdoors, because I worked for the California Conservation Corps. I had all this experience, way more experience than the other people that had interviewed. But according to them, I got it because I was a woman and not because of my experience. And that was my story.
Yeah, and that can work as well where you have somebody that's not as qualified.
Yeah.
That you have somebody that's not as qualified that would get the job over somebody that is qualified, more qualified. Mm-hmm. So affirmative action is defined as a set of procedures designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination among applicants, remedy the results of such prior discrimination, and prevent such discrimination in the future. Applicants may be seeking admission to an educational program or looking for professional employment. So what she says is we're not practicing equality, is what she said in that study. We're not practicing equality, we're practicing equity and affirmative action until we reach equality. So I understand that we can either, men and women, that still haven't shaken that patriarchal structure. To me, it goes back to, and thank you for filling in the right word, humility. I mean, we know Christ is our example, and humility is one of those things to pray for, because what's the opposite of humility? I don't know if opposite's the right word, but what would you put there of humility?
Right.
Pride. What's that verse? Pride goeth before a fall, something like that. So holding on to pride. Well, if you just took humility and pride, trying to think how to ask the question. Which kingdom would you find pride in?
The one that's going to burn.
That's Satan's kingdom,
Satan's kingdom.
Yeah.
the wrong side.
So we can humble ourselves to what God is doing, or we can hold on to our pride and wind
I
up in
think
Satan's kingdom. Huh?
I think even God is humble. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just get that impression that
Yeah.
God is humble.
Yes.
Well, you know, when Jesus was here, he was very humble,
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
and in his reflection of the Father. So yeah, so God is humble.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's beautiful because God has so, I mean, God created us, and to still be humble, even though you can create life, it's just, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Because you're not in it for self, you're in it for others.
Right, exactly. And you want your creations to thrive and to be happy and to be cheerful and to help each other and to support each other, lift each other up. And it's just beautiful. God is beautiful.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. That's absolutely correct.
So
Yeah, and I'm not even sure what the problem of men, why they're so afraid. I mean, because fear, the replacement theory, the fear of being replaced, white being feared, fear of being replaced by blacks, men by fear of replacing women. Those are, I mean, just my opinion, but those fears are unwarranted. I mean, why do they feel like they have to be on top by stepping on somebody else's neck? To me, I just don't get it. And for us men here in this movement, I think I said the saying before, you're either in or you're in the way. And I just think if you get out of the way, women will naturally rise. Just get out of the way. I mean, I don't think men even have to. Yes, we want. I mean, yes, we want to support them. We want to encourage them, and all that positive stuff. But I think if we just simply get out of the way, women will rise. They have to.
yeah.
I mean, because that's just like I mean, we've seen many examples where a husband leaves a wife with children, and these women scramble and do whatever they can to feed their children. They may not rise to the occasion of being a millionaire, but they do what needs to be done to keep the family afloat. And I think it just men just realize that just stay out. If you don't want to help, then just get out of the way and women will naturally rise.
Yeah, 'cause if you don't want to help, then you're a hindrance, and the hindrances need to be removed.
Right, just get out of the way.
Yeah,
I totally agree to that, but only to a point. Because, and I'll show you my point. Because women have been taught for so long that we can't. And so if somebody is at that point where they think they can't, then they might not try to rise above. So they might need some encouragement. And that's my only point, is they might need more, some women might need more encouragement than others.
that might go
If
to
that-
what, that might go to what Phil was saying, those, if you're not gonna help, or you're not gonna
Right.
encourage, you're not gonna do it, then get out of the
Yeah.
way.
Right. And I believe that. I agree. Exactly, Phil. Yes.
But probably generally the ones that are not doing the encouragement are not the ones seeing that they're in the way either.
True. Yeah, that's true.
So. Anybody else? Well, we can close early if you want. And I didn't see, at least the last time I checked, I guess there was no Vespers class last week.
That's what Luke said.
He did say that? I never asked him.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was last Wednesday. Somebody in the chat asked him, I think it was on Wednesday, and he said that there was not a Vespers last week,
Okay,
or at least it wasn't recorded. He didn't actually say. Just somebody said, was there a Vespers last week? And Luke said, no, not last week.
okay,
Yeah, and Aaron verified that too. He said that they took a week off.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
okay. So we should see one pop up then.
This week,